So we can acquire property way cheaper than the normal person who simply goes and buys finished product. And that's how we build long-term wealth, because that enables us to, as developers, to build a substantial property portfolio, but quicker than we can in the normal retail market where we're paying a retail price.
Welcome to the Debt to Financial Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Victor Lagos, and the founder of Lagos Financial. I've been in the finance and lending industry for 16 years, and I've personally made financial mistakes and learned from them. I started this podcast to share stories and lessons on my own journey and to share insights that may help others on their journey. And I interview people that I've connected with that share the same values and mission to help others create financial freedom. My goal with this podcast is to share raw, honest, transparent, and helpful stories that you can relate to and inspires you to take control of your finances and only have debt that brings you closer to financial freedom. Welcome to the Debt to Financial Freedom podcast. I am your host, Victor Lagos. Today is episode 11, and I have Mr. Bob Andersen on the show today. Hey Bob, how are you, mate?
Hey, I'm great. Great to be here.
Awesome. Look, I want to give a bit of an intro to Bob for those of you who don't know who he is. Bob Andersen is the director of Property Mastermind. Bob Andersen has over 39 years experience in development, investment, and marketing sectors of the property industry. During this time, Bob has had senior management roles in some of Australia's largest property development companies. Bob has been involved in more than 1.3 billion worth of property development projects that include commercial buildings, apartments, high-rise buildings, retirement complexes, land subdivisions, townhouses, student accommodation, and NDIS projects. At any time, Bob typically has between 50 million to 80 million worth of projects in the pipeline. Bob is the author of the book Residential Real Estate Development, a practical guide for beginners to experts, and appears in other books, Secrets of Property Millionaires Exposed and the New Way to Make Money in Property Fast. He has also been a regular contributor to different publications such as Your Property Investment Magazine, the Australian Property Investor Magazine, Money Magazine, and Success Magazine. He's appeared on media interviews to talk about his experience as a property developer on Sky News, Fox News, 4BC Radio, and ABC Radio. Bob has changed the lives of so many people through his renowned property development courses by training them to use property development as a vehicle to build substantial cash flow and long-term wealth. Wow. It's very impressive, Bob. How is that?
That's a mouthful.
It is.
Oh, well, I've been around for a while, so I guess,
39
it's
years
a slightly
now.
longer story. Probably near 40, yeah. Been a while in property development, yeah.
Well,
I always say
Here, go on. Say.
I often say if I'd found something better to do, I'd be doing it. But the fact that I'm still doing it after all these years is probably testimony to property development.
Yeah. Well, you're obviously passionate about it, and as you've said, well, as your intro said, you've helped many people along the way. But I want to hear a little bit about your personal and your professional story and what led you to be a property developer and to start Property Mastermind.
Yeah, well, it all started with a pretty serious car accident I had when I was a young man. I was on my way home from a mate's 21st, quite sober, in fact. But I went to sleep about 4 a.m. in the morning and ran into a bridge, and that put me out of action I was on crutches for about a year, and it took about 18 months to recuperate. So that gave me lots of time to lie on my back and contemplate my life, and came to the realisation I was having what I thought was a pretty good life. I had a couple of cash businesses. I was sort of a young entrepreneur, just living for the moment, really. I'm not thinking too much about the future, but it's funny what happens when you have a near-death experience like that car accident. In fact, when the police arrived, they thought I was dead. Pleased to say I fooled them. But, it gave me a lot of time to think about things on my back, recuperating, and realise that there's more to life than just living the sort of life I was living. And I decided, well, when I get well, what am I going to do? And I thought a lot about it. Property, I'd had a little bit of a knowledge about property, but really not much at all. shares sort of scared me. I knew zero about shares. I only knew a little bit about property because I lived in one. But yeah, got back on my feet and I thought, well, if I'm going to do property, where's the money made? And I started to have a look around, had a look at real estate agents, had a look at valuers and all sorts of people, and I came to the conclusion pretty sensibly that property developers seem to make the most money. So not even knowing how to do it, and I thought, well, property development, that'll get me back on my legs, because I ended up having to move home with my mum and dad while I was recuperating. I think I had $5 in the bank by the time I was back on my legs again. And so I thought, yep, I need money. And so property development was where it was going to be. I spoke to a few people I knew. I did know through a friend of my dad's, someone who did some small developments. I knew a builder, talked to them. Builders not developers, but I thought it was somewhere near. And I also thought, well, I lived in Brisbane at the time, so I thought I'll head to the Gold Coast, because I thought everybody went to the Gold Coast to make money. And not realising back in those days, probably plenty of people went to the Gold Coast and lost money. But anyway, there you are, young man, 10 foot tall, bulletproof, dangerous, not even knowing what I didn't know, and headed off to the Gold Coast. And unable to go straight into property development, I went into agency, and I joined a real estate agency at the back of the Gold Coast at a place called Mudgery Bar, which was selling land estates, and that was my first foray into real property as such, and that was as a salesman. But I was selling land to builders, and then builders built houses, and I was selling builders houses and talking to developers of the different estates, and I was getting all excited about the fact that I could be one. And so that was my foray. I was lucky enough to meet somebody there at the time who had some land. They got an approval to cut it into 4 lots, and then they decided to sell it, 4-lot subdivision. And I was looking at it to sell it, and then I thought, gee, I'd love to do this. This could be my first chance. I went to the owner and I said, look, I'd love to buy it. I just don't have enough money. And that person, Tony was his name, gave me my first big break. And he said, oh, you don't need money to do property development. You just have to know different strategies. And I ended up doing what we later came to know as a vendor finance deal with Tony, where he sold me the land, took me to his bank, in fact, helped me finance it, sold me the land. I settled on the site. I took possession of it, and using the land as security. And Tony, I gave him half the money. I owed him the other half, which I paid him back with interest when I sold the land. And so typical, what we call a vendor finance deal. That got me going on my legs. All of a sudden I made money, didn't put any money in, made some money, and I was away. I can't say it was a smooth ride from then, but it has its bumps and its detours, and still does. But that's, property development. There's you can make a lot of money out of it, but you got to do it right, and there's always things to overcome, like any business, really.
Yeah, wow. And what led you to start Property Mastermind?
Yeah, so Property Mastermind is really the education business. So we have 2 businesses, I guess you could say. Property Mastermind is an education where we teach people how to be developers, and we also are developers in our own right. So it came about back in the early 2000s, in fact, when my son joined me after he finished uni, and I thought, oh, that's great, I'll just buy him a couple of books on property development. It can bring him up to pace, and I couldn't find any that were any good. And then I thought, well, what courses are there? Because remember, I was just full-time developing at this point. I wasn't really thinking of the education side of it. Couldn't find any good courses. There was sort of one out there which wasn't really much chop. And then I thought, well, there's a bit of a hole there. And over a period of the next couple of years, as you do when you're out, in the marketplace, I did see a few people who'd gotten into trouble doing things, and I could see that it was just a pure lack of knowledge. They just didn't have any experience in what they were doing. And I thought, well, I should do something. So I actually wrote a book and it was released in 2006. It's out of print now. It's been out of print for a while, but it was on property development, how to do it. And then a couple of years later, I thought, well, I might take that the next step. In about 2009, I actually built a proper course. Very early days on online, marketed it online. It was a solid course that I'd sent out in the mail, it was all, CDs. It sounds ancient now, it's probably only 14 years ago, with, CDs and manuals. And that was my first course. Got accepted pretty well, and so I then started some weekend workshops, and then I started a mentoring program just for a limited amount of people, where I worked personally with people on helping them with their developments, and sort of all grew from there, probably about 14 years ago, until we are what we are now. So, yeah, I guess the point of it was I could see that people really needed education that wasn't there. There's a lot more out there now, of course. Most people that have property development courses are actually old students of mine. But back in the day, there wasn't anything there. And I thought, well, if I can get something decent out there, people will be able to, I suppose, make less mistakes, not get into trouble, but ideally, on the positive side, learn the ropes properly and make money, build wealth out of property development.
And I've seen you mentioned financial freedom as well, and obviously the podcast is called Debt to Financial Freedom. So my question is, what does financial freedom mean to you? And I guess, how do you help your students and your community to achieve that?
Yeah, I guess it means different things to different people, but I mean, financial freedom means that, well, you're in control. I think you're in control of your finances. You're in control of your situation. So you're not at the whim necessarily of markets. You're not at the whim of society or what society's expectations are of you. So you need to rise above that. But on a personal point of view, I mean, it means to be able to do the sort of things that you want to do, when you want to do them, where you want to do them, with whom you want to do them, I guess. And to me, that comes back to being in control. It means having to work less initially if people are transitioning from full-time into ultimately, are living purely off their investments. It doesn't happen in 5 minutes. It's a transitional process, but ultimately living off passive income and living off the sort of life that you want, lifestyle. I think everybody seeks a good lifestyle. It's not the same for everybody, but whatever people's definition of is lifestyle, I think it requires time, because you need spare time. It's no good if you're working 80 hours a week in a job. You're not going to have any spare time to enjoy your life. So it requires time, and it requires money. Not that everything enjoyable is related to money. Some of the most enjoyable things in life don't actually cost money, but it's great if you've got it. And so if you've got time on your side and you've got money, then you can create a lifestyle, and that lifestyle isn't partly building future wealth, of course. That's really important, but it's also enjoying life along the way, and not slogging it out for 40 years until you're mid or late 60s before you can take a deep breath and start to enjoy life, I think.
You're definitely speaking my language there, Bob. So,
Oh, I know. I've followed you, and I know exactly how you think, and we're like-minded in that respect, for sure.
Yeah, really appreciate you sharing some of your insights today. And I want to ask, I guess, how does property development fit into, creating passive income streams? Because obviously it's more about profit, right? When you subdivide land, when you build and then you sell, you're sort of cashing in on that. So it's profit related. How does that tie into creating passive income streams?
Well, you are correct in that it's profit related, because we don't do property development if we don't intend to make a profit. But I suppose if you take one step back, we're talking property development, and property is a great asset class. I love it. It's the one I got involved in early in the piece. It's the one I've stuck with, and we know that property is a good long-term, tax-effective, proven way of building wealth. It's not the only one. I mean, I'm not 100% property and 0% all other strategies, outside of property, not at all. But it's the one I chose, and it's the one that I put most of my effort into. And so you could say, well, okay, I've chosen property in my case to build wealth. But property development, yes, we do intend to make a profit, and we do make a profit. It's certainly the intention. But when you sell your product at the other end, let's keep it really simple as an example. Let's say we were to build a duplex, so 2 units, we build a duplex. We've got a number of options at the end of that. We could sell them both. We could keep them both as investments. Or we could even do a mix. We could sell one and keep one. And that's one of the great things I love about property development is the flexibility of being able to sell or to keep what we create. So if we sell, we make a cash profit and we pay tax on that profit and we're left with a net. It's the same as any business operation where you have gross income less your expenses equals your net and you pay tax on it. It's no different in property development, except that the numbers can be quite substantial in terms of how much you can make. I never worry about paying tax. I'd love to pay more tax next year than I did this year, for instance. It means I'm making more money, so I never worry about tax. What you do need, of course, is to be structured the best way you can to minimise your tax, but I never worry about paying it. So what we sell, that's income, and that's cash. And we need cash, don't we? We need, we have to go to Coles every week or whatever it is and buy our groceries. We've got to pay our utility bills. The lifestyle that I just spoke about, that requires cash. We might want to travel or might want to help other people, whatever we're doing, we need cash. And we get our cash from what we sell. But what we want to do as developers, if not immediately, then along the way, start to keep some of the property that we create. And this is how we build long-term wealth. Just as somebody out in the normal market might buy property investments for long-term wealth. They're looking at cash flow, they're looking at capital growth. Well, that's great. But a big advantage of a developer is that we create property at absolute raw cost. So we don't pay retail. We don't even pay wholesale. We pay raw cost. We create it out of, well, I wasn't going to say out of nothing, but we create it at raw cost. And that means we're getting, yeah, exactly. So we can acquire property way cheaper than the normal person who simply goes and buys finished product. And that's how we build long-term wealth, because that enables us to, as developers, to build a substantial property portfolio, but quicker than we can in the normal retail market where we're paying a retail price. So as developers, when we finish developing a product, we can use our profit at the other end when we finance and hold it. We use our profit as our deposit. So unlike the normal market where we pay retail price, we have to pay a deposit. We normally do that by harvesting equity of other properties that have grown in value, and that's great. But we can do it a lot quicker as property developers, and so that's the long-term wealth thing. And we've got that flexibility. We need cash, we sell stuff, we build long-term wealth, we hold our product.
Yeah, it makes sense. It actually sounds like
flexibility.
A no-brainer for anyone to do property development. And I think it's one of those things that, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And there are inherent risks when you do property development, of course. And I want to ask you from your experience, because you've obviously been doing it for a long time, what are the biggest risks for first-time developers as well as experienced developers?
Yeah, well, definitely for first-time developers, it's going in there with little or no knowledge. To think that you can learn everything about property development free online, you can't. And you can certainly find some good articles, some blogs, all sorts of things there, but the detail that you need to know to effectively do a property development is not just there. And so you need to educate yourself and do a property development course for sure before you launch into doing a development. And that's really important, and that's where I see people going wrong sometimes. Obviously, I'm out in the marketplace quite a lot. We even get calls from people who are maybe in a little bit of trouble, and it's often because they simply never educated themselves. They just launched into it. They thought it's a good idea. I'll sort of have a look around. I'll try and reverse engineer what I've seen other people do on the sideline, and that's how you get into trouble. So that, to me, that's the most important thing. That's the biggest risk, or the biggest mistake people make when they're new. In terms of experienced developers, obviously they pass the education stage. They've got knowledge. Sometimes I think they extend themselves. When I've seen developers, larger developers, get into trouble, it's often because they've taken on too much, too many projects. It's hard to say no sometimes when you find another good project and you just jump in there. Quite often they're really highly geared. They may be, and I'm not against, for instance, using different layers of finance, including mezzanine finance. But I've seen developers to get the most out of their equity, take on too many projects, very highly geared, using senior debt and mezzanine debt and at high interest. And, you only need a bit of a couple of hiccups and, one gets into trouble and there can be a domino effect. So I think there needs to be a certain element of conservatism and respect when you're doing property development and work within your comfort zone. I'm sure yourself, when you've helped finance people into development projects, you feel a lot more comfortable when you know that they're doing it safely and they're not extending themselves to their last cent. It's not a good position to be in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you touched on the gearing themselves too much, and banks. Everyone would like to get a bank loan because usually they're the cheapest interest rates. They'll extend it over a longer term. But the moment you start building or developing property for a profit, and you start going, say, 3, 4 titles and more, it's considered commercial lending rather than residential lending, even if you're building residential property. From your experience, why would you say that is?
Well, I think that banks, and I'm talking about the retail arm of a bank, which is what you're referring to, the lower interest, the sort of banking that most people are used to when they're buying their house or an investment property, so retail arm, they make their money by lower interest rates lent over a long period of time. So they love a 20 or even a 30-year loan. I don't know if you still get 30-year loans, I'm too old for that. But low interest rate, long term, that's how they make their money. And so if somebody was to use that sort of finance to do a development, the bank wouldn't make much out of it. It's such a low interest rate, but for such a short amount of time. I mean, the loan might be 12 months, 18 months, whatever it is, 2 years, at a low interest rate. And by the time they write in their upfront costs and everything, it's probably not worth their bother. And that's why I think that they're not all that in favour. They're more likely to send you off to their commercial arm for a start, where they make their money by charging a higher interest rate for a short period of time. But then you and I know that the banks have been pretty tough the last few years, and you can't always be guaranteed a bank a loan even at the commercial arm of a bank. And fortunately, there's other resources outside of the banking system for developers. So yeah, I think that's the reason.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that a little bit because a lot of people have experience dealing with banks, first tier, second tier, the retail arm. Some of my listeners have got experience dealing with commercial finance, buying commercial property, still buy and hold. But there are non-banks and there's private lenders that really hone in on this space of development. Why do you think it's their main focus compared to the banks? Why can they do stuff that the banks can't?
Well, it's probably one of the main reasons is that the banks are very conservative by nature. I mean, they don't have to extend themselves to make money. They make so much money out of fees for a start, before they even lend money at a margin. So they do very well out of fees, and they make the rest of their money, or a lot of it anyway, by lending at a margin above what they pay for their money. But so they're not really pushed for business so much, and they can afford to choose the sort of loans that they want to lend on. So and they're sitting in a pretty good position to do that. The price that they can acquire capital at is quite cheap, really. Banks, both onshore and offshore, so they get cheap money. They can lend it out cheaper, there's a lot of housing loans, of course, in the retail area where they're just lending on completed products. And so the difference between a property development is they're asking a financier to lend us money on something that doesn't yet exist. I mean, the land exists, but we're saying, well, give us some more money to build. And so at the end of it, we have finished product, but we're not starting with finished product. So there's a higher element of risk for a lender in there. But with, banks, and banks, of course, operate under APRA. So there's quite strict rules on how banks can operate. But when you move outside of the banking sector, as you well know, I'm sure you operate a lot in that non-bank sector. They're not under the same rules. They're not under APRA. They operate under ASIC. So it's a different set of rules. They pay more for their money, and therefore they have to lend it out at a higher rate, and they have to make a commercial margin on it. They don't have all those fees on accounts that normal banks have, so they have to be very commercially minded, and they are, and they've positioned themselves to lend on deals that the banks won't necessarily lend on. Doesn't mean that they're a bad deal. You can have a good deal put up to a bank, but because of their rigidity or even because of a postcode, they're just not going to lend to you, but still a good deal. And so the non-banks step into that space, and they take a big part of the market. I did hear not long ago that in the development finance sector that the non-bank sector, everything that's not a bank, supplies about 80% of finance these days, whereas many years ago it's probably the banks that supplied 80% of development finance. Thank goodness for the non-banks, I say.
Yeah, right. Yes, and what many people don't know, when you go below the non-banks, who obviously non-banks are, still can be quite large financial institutions that, have fund managers backing them. But then you've got private lenders who don't even report to ASIC, and they raise capital from private investors, high net worth individuals, family offices, and they basically pay them for their capital, a return on their investment, with limited risk because they obviously are providing credit contract to fund a particular project potentially, but it's short term. It's they're doing their due diligence on the borrower, on the builder, on the developer, etc., and they're putting a margin. So essentially, they're not even lending out their own money; they're lending they're middlemen. So, but there's a lot of players in this space, and I have heard through the grapevine that many of them are cowboys in that they will look at a deal commercially and they'll know the risks and they'll know that there's an opportunity for them to take possession of the property at the end because they know there's a very high chance they're not going to be able to complete the project. So then they'll want to repossess it and take the profit. So that's why I typically steer away from a lot of them because I don't know them, they're not reputable. So it does come down to who you know, who's got a proven track record, who's endorsed by, the mortgage and finance industry bodies and whatnot. So what's your experience with, I guess, sifting through those array of private lenders out there?
Yeah. Well, I'd loosely break them up into banks, which we've talked about. Then what I call a non-bank is often institutional to a degree, and I'm certainly looking for longevity there. Not necessarily a player that's come in recently, but look, it has drawn in, because the banks have been tight for some time, it has drawn in a lot of players in the non-bank sector. I'm looking for people that have been around that, just like you said, they've got a good track record. They've been lending for quite a while. Valuation firms are happy to work with them. They're just endorsed by the industry, and they're fine. Moving into private equity, like you discussed, they're not under APRA, they're not under ASIC, so they're pretty much write their own rules. They have to be select, and you're right. There are some lenders in that space who are looking for a reason for a default, and so there are a few landmines there. I think what you need to do, and my recommendation is anybody starting out in property development is to get their finance through a broker every day of the week, somebody who understands development finance for a start, and it's quite different from retail finance. And who knows the different lenders, and they can, if they don't think that you're appropriate for a bank, then they know a number of non-banks, reputable ones, who have a good track record. And that's what I always say: get your finance through a broker, particularly when in your early years, and maybe even in the later years for that matter. But they will know the places to go to, but also some of the ones that have a reputation not to go to. I think that's all part of having a good team.
Which actually leads me to my next question. I always talk about having a trusted network of professionals as part of your team to help you achieve your goals. in property development, this is even more important because you've got a much, I guess, larger network that required to execute a deal from, from concept to completion and on to sale. So what I want to ask you is, what are some of the key um, professionals you will need in your team when doing a property development? I know everyone will need a good accountant that understands property development. They'll need a good lawyer that understands, the structure, and if you're doing a syndicate and involving other people, there needs to be certain agreements and who's going to manage what, who's going to distribute the profit, how is it distributed, what happens if someone dies, etc. There's quite a lot involved on that side. But then once you start looking at the property itself or the land acquisition, there's a whole bunch of other professionals that even like most people would never even need to deal with on another, in their lifetime. So can you give
Yeah.
us some list there?
Yeah, so spot on there. You took the words out of my mouth. There's three professionals that I would take with me all the time, and that's a good accountant, as you say, understands tax structures, a good lawyer, property lawyer, and a good finance broker. To me, they just would travel around, if you like, to different projects. But then you have the project specific professionals, and that's going to depend a lot on the type of project. So the simpler the project, the less professionals that you need. And to me, the smallest property development that you could do would be, let's say, a two-lot subdivision, where one lot into two lots, and pretty simple little team there. I mean, in terms of the actual rolling out of the development, a town planner, a civil engineer, and a surveyor will handle all of that. They'll help you get your approvals. They'll help you also get the thing built and finished. People both ends of that would be perhaps, people like real estate agents or buyer's agents who can help you find the deal in the first place. And also the marketing at the other end could be, once again, it could be a real estate agent to help you sell. So they're both ends of it. But in the middle, when you're actually doing a development, it could be as simple as 2 or 3 people. But as soon as you introduce construction to the equation, it gets more complex. And so to me, the simplest one would be perhaps when you do a 2-lot subdivision and you build a house on 1 or 2 of the lots. That's fairly straightforward. Once now you're introducing design, so you're introducing, well, look, it could be a project builder who can handle a lot of that, the whole design thing in-house, or maybe not, or a duplex, let's say. That's another simple one. 2 units joined. I say a duplex is a big house with a wall up the middle, but once you introduce construction, so there might be an architect or a building designer to do the design. We'll have a town planner in there as well. We'll have a surveyor, have a landscape architect, and there might be 4 or even 5 professionals we use to get our approval. And then we'll move on to our building permit or our construction certificate. And once again, the architect's back with a few more engineers in there to help, and a couple of other consultants. We might end up on something like a duplex for our full approvals, 5 or 6 different professional people along the way. And then we move into the construction. Well, that's a builder mostly during that point, and perhaps a quantity surveyor on the way through. And then at the other end, well, we're back to, lawyers and marketers and selling stuff. So a good team, I always say a good team is the key to success. We've got our core team of 3 that I mentioned, including yourself, and all these other ones that we may transport these other professionals from project to project, but sometimes if we're doing a project in a different location, we might use a different town planner, a different architect, or a different type of product, maybe somebody a bit different. If we're doing some specialised development, like something like the NDIS, where we need a specialised building designer who's very familiar with the very strict requirements that are required. So we might not always use the same professionals in every project, other than our core of 3.
Sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces in a development. The more when there's construction involved, there's obviously much more required. If you're getting private certifiers, or if you're having to go through council, there's obviously development approvals and that need to go through environmental court sometimes. So there's quite a bit that you need to manage. So if you're the developer you need to basically project manage the whole thing, or would you then hire a PM or a DM or a development manager or project manager to kind of do a lot of that legwork that can navigate a lot of moving parts at the same time, and you just pay him a fee? What would you say is a better way of doing it?
Yeah. Well, well, I personally don't necessarily recommend getting a project manager in to run everything. Mainly, I mean, I'm not a control freak, but if I'm getting somebody to manage something for me, I want to know actually how it works in the first place. Otherwise, I'm not going to know what they're doing. And you're not going to learn by engaging a project manager because they're not in the business of having people hang around and teach them. They just want to get in and get paid and get their job done. So that, look, you can. I'm saying you can't. You won't learn much doing that. I always like the idea of learning what to do, and then, you know, if you're outsourcing, then to at least know what you're doing. So at least do one or two developments before you look at outsourcing somebody to do everything. Otherwise, you're not really going to know what they're doing, or if if they suddenly fall under a concrete truck or something, that you'll be able to pick it up. But you can subcontract in a way. And for instance, during your approval process, say for a duplex, sorry, just have to cut. Dry throat. Hope you moment. Bit dry, sorry.
It's okay. It's happened to me too.
A bit more water. Have a drink. Just go back to that. Now, during the approval process, you can actually subcontract a bit. So what I mean by that is the lead consultant, let's say on a duplex, to me is the architect. Some people might say it's the town planner, but I'll go with the architect. And an architect can coordinate that process. They can work with the town planner, with the surveyor, and with the landscape architect to help get that approval. And at the next stage, the building permit or the construction certificate, once again, they can work with the different consultants there. So they're like a lead consultant. And so in a way you can work directly with the architect, who can then, if you like, coordinate the other consultant. So that's one way of cutting back on your workload. I'd still like to know what everybody's doing. And if you are leaving it up to one person, then you need to be right on top of the architect, make sure they don't go to sleep on the job either. So, there is that ability to cut your workload back, but to me, the best way is to learn property development properly, do a course, get educated, do it yourself, do a couple of projects, and then if you want to start subcontracting, or particularly if you get a few projects going and you've got a little bit of experience behind you, then you can bring in a project manager because you'll know exactly what's going on, you know what they're doing, you'll be over top of everything, and you'll be able to actually not be subservient to them, but you are the developer, so they need to work under you. They need to do their job. They're professionals. They know what to do, but you really need to know what's going on. That's the way I've always done it and taught it.
Yeah. That's why education is so important, right? It's to equip you with the knowledge and the information you need so that, of course, you want to make informed decisions, but it's so you know to ask the right questions to the professionals that you seek out. So you can guide them and they don't, like you said, they don't lead you without you realizing what they're doing, right? They take you for a ride. But I haven't seen your course. I don't know too much about it. Are you able to sort of share what's included? Or is it multiple courses that you offer and mentoring programs?
Well, I try to keep it fairly simple. We do have a new website coming out probably not long after this podcast goes to air, in fact, probably within a fortnight. So, but the current one's got good information on it. That's propertymastermind.com.au. The course that most people do is a bundle of two courses. It's an online course where you can learn at your own pace, as fast or as slow as you like. And it's the full A to Z of property development, so it's got 40 years of experience built into that course, so it's good. And also part of that course is a 3-day workshop, which we have one around mid-year, which we do on Zoom, and we have one at the end of the year, which is a live in person, and it's a great 3 days. So it's a combination of online and the workshop, and that's launched plenty of developers, and that information about that is on the website, propertymastermind.com.au. But you just, I can't emphasise as much, hard enough that you really do need to get educated. Obviously, I'm not going to push my own education course, but get educated no matter who you go to. Don't just launch into property development, because there's so many little twists and turns. Alternatively, we do have a mentoring program, and it is limited by numbers. That's for people who really want their hand held all the way. So they work individually with myself and two of my team members, Hilary as well. And so we work on a daily basis, one-on-one with people. That's people who really want the confidence of working closely with an experienced developer all the way through. It's a big safety net, of course, for people, and also they're going to learn really fast how to be a full-blooded property developer. And that's really the two main things that we offer to get people through safely and get them making money. Brilliant thing about knowledge, once you've got it, you don't have to keep reinvesting in it. So really it's something you acquire once, and then you're away.
Yeah, and it becomes applied knowledge rather than just absorbing information. By mentoring them, you're actually helping them along the way, giving them feedback, and stopping them from sort of jumping in, because it's so easy to like make a quick decision thinking it's the right thing to do, commit to something, and then all of a sudden it's very hard to unwind, and you're sort of stuck and you're losing money and you have to kill the deal potentially. So I think it's a great thing that you offer.
Exactly. One of our mentoring students, Jamie was saying not long ago, he's finished the mentoring program now, but he joined just as he was about to go to contract on a site. And he said that it wasn't a good one. I had to look at it straight away, and he said that paid for his mentoring program in the first couple of days when I told him to kill the deal, do not sign that contract. So as you just rightly said, it's not just what you do, it's what you don't do that matters as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. And a lot of people will think you need to have access to some cash, right, to start property development. You need to have equity in your properties. You need to even have property. But you mentioned that you did it doing vendor finance, and where you didn't put any money down. And there's other ways of doing it. I mentioned it earlier, which is property syndicates or joint ventures. Are you able to sort of give an overview of how that works exactly, and how you guys can actually help facilitate that? Because a lot of people don't know the right people or know what questions to ask to get them involved in putting money together for a site and for a development.
Yeah, quite true. So I call those creative strategies, or creative finance, I guess. And my first two projects were exactly that, different models, but were those. And I got to admit, I did stumble through there, but I managed. I survived my first couple of projects, got me off to a good start. But so if we look at financing a development, it's quite simple. There, you have to put in a certain amount of equity up front. Then the financier will put in the rest as a loan, and that gives you enough money to do a development. So the so-called creative strategies are often around, well, where does that equity come from? That first chunk of money that we have to put down before the financier tips in their money. And the obvious answer is, well, if we don't have it, it's got to come from somewhere. So where is somewhere? Somewhere could be another person. It could be an investor. It could be somebody who has that money, that amount of money, that equity, but they don't know how to do a property development. In fact, they probably don't even want to know how to do a property development necessarily, but they do like the idea of making good money out of a property development. So it's an investor. So that model, in simplicity, is what I call a joint venture, because it is a venture to make money. It's jointly. In this case, it's between two people. And so the developer partner, if you like, the developer person, well, they would have the knowledge to do the development, and they would basically do it. They'd manage it. They'd find the site, get the approvals, get it built, get it sold. The other person, the investor, well, they would supply that cash equity up front to make sure that we could get the loan to do it. And in its simplest form, that's what it is, and that's a way of doing it. Now, at the end, of course, the project makes a profit, and that profit could be shared then between those two people. So the developer, well, they get a chunk of the profit. Let's say it was 50%, which it can often be. They get 50% of the profit, but they never put any money into it. What they did put in though was time and expertise, time and knowledge, if you like. And they got a great reward for that without putting money in. From the investor's point of view, well, they put up the money. They get that money back at the end, plus, let's say, 50% of the profits. But they didn't have to do the work, and they didn't have to have the knowledge, which they, in many cases, don't. I mean, that investor could be your dentist, who knows? It could be a doctor, it could be a neighbour, it could be a relative, it could be anybody. And that gives them the opportunity of making really good money, get a really good return on their capital without doing the work, and vice versa. So it's a very mutually beneficial joint venture. That's a typical type of creative strategy. It's not the only one, but it's a popular one.
So my question is, when you start to do larger developments and you need more capital and more investors, and so it gets a little bit more complex in the structure, maybe a unit trust, you're not necessarily giving away profit, but you're paying interest on loans because most of the deal's been done and it's just needing sort of more capital injections. Do you have ways to help your students that go through either your mentoring or your course to present a information memorandum or some sort of pitch deck to help them raise the capital? Because you can imagine there's a lot of questions for an investor, especially if it is your dentist, and say, oh, can you give me 300 grand for a development? They're going to want to understand a lot about the deal and what are the risks involved, what are the potential uplift and the time frames, return of their capital, etc. Like, is that something you guys help with as well?
Yeah, so in the course that I mentioned previously, I've got a course within a course, you could say, on a range of these creative strategies. I've chosen five quite common sort of ones to do, and that's in the course as to how they roll out. Within our mentoring program, we also go into that in even a deeper level, and we help people. We often help people find investors in that case in our mentoring program. And investors often like the idea, if they do invest in a project, particularly if somebody like myself is overviewing it, who has done 1.3 billion. I've actually worked out that I've done over $300 million worth of projects of a creative manner where we didn't put any money in at all. And various ones, some with just little mums and dads investors, and a couple with ASX listed companies as well, and even a couple of government departments. So you can graduate up into that, but yeah, I certainly teach that. I was doing syndicates back in the late 80s, and in fact, even prior to that, as I mentioned, my first two projects, the first one was what we call a vendor finance type strategy, and the second one I did was the one I just talked about a moment ago, was a joint venture with an equity partner where the person that put the money in was my sister's boyfriend at the time. And she had a boyfriend called Keith who was an earth mover. He had a few dollars. And he saw me make quite a chunk of money out of my first project, the vendor finance one. And he said, my goodness, how'd you do that? And I said, oh, it's pretty clever, Keith. I said, which it wasn't really, because I did stumble through it and got a bit of help from the seller as well. And I said, look, I'm happy to do a deal with you if you've got some money. And true to form, Keith put up the money, the equity on the second project. We borrowed the rest of the money from the financier. And I did a second one. So I've done my first two projects, two different strategies, without putting 5 cents in the deal. That gave me a love of that. So over the years, I've structured and fine-tuned many different ways of making money out of zero, I suppose, zero equity, and syndicates and joint ventures with landowners and using call options, all sorts of things.
Options,
yeah, we do teach those in our course.
Yeah, we didn't even touch on that, right? Call options and options trading. Yeah, when you basically have the rights to a property without owning it. Look, we can obviously the more detailed conversation. We can probably talk for hours about this. But a couple of more questions before we wrap it up. My question is, with the current interest rate environment that we're in, there's obviously a higher cost of living, higher cost of materials for construction, global inflation that we're going on. Would you say it's a challenging time for developers right now, or would you say it's a good time to find opportunities?
Well, we have gone through quite a challenging time. Coming out of the pandemic, a little while ago now, almost forgotten about that. It's funny how we get on with our life, isn't it? And I sort of don't think about that too much. But that created some issues, of course. It was more the reconstruction after that created a lot of growth in the market. It created a lot of increased costs of construction. And so we've been through the worst of that. We've had some very rapid rises in 21, 22 and even a bit into 23 of large increases in construction prices, shortages of labour, shortages of materials. A lot of that, it's not back to what it was, but it has improved quite a bit. I deal with a lot of builders, of course, and a lot of quantity surveyors. Certainly the material supply has improved a lot. Labour has improved quite a bit. But we did have those large price increases. And while values went up a lot, it was mainly housing that went up a lot in value. Townhouses did to a degree, apartments did to a degree, but not as much. That's because all the stimulus from the government was directed at short-term remedies, which really meant more quick builds and housing and that sort of stuff rather than longer-term builds with townhouse developments and the like. So, but that, like everything, if you leave it alone, it'll find its own level. And so it's going back to that now. So build costs have stabilised to a fair degree. They're still going up a little bit. But if you look at some of the big quantity surveyor firms, they're only predicting 3 and 4% increases during the next 12 months. So the worst is certainly past in terms of construction pricing. And I have noticed, even talking to some of our builders, that some of the trades have actually come back a little bit in their rates. But look, it is what it is. Interest rates, well, we've seen them rise, but they were never going to stay where they were. My goodness, that's I couldn't believe how low they got. Never seen anything like that in 40 years. I should point out a couple of my very early projects, I paid over 20% interest back in the early 80s for money. There was a credit squeeze on, so that doesn't 6 or 7% doesn't 8%, 9%, 10% on non-banks. That doesn't frighten me at all. I've made good money in higher interest rate regimes. So it's just getting back, it hasn't even reached the 30-year average yet, interest rates, standard variable rate. It is what it is. We'll get used to it again. Inflation's slowly getting under control. We've seen it drop a bit. It'll get back to that sort of 3%, in probably 18 months, in my opinion. Interest rates, I don't think they've got much more to go, and I think they're leaving a little bit of a headroom for a pullback in rates, maybe, like sometime next year, but we'll see. But I'm happy enough with interest rates. They are what they are. There's a lot of other things you do in property development that you can control. And, the price of money is just a price of doing business, really. It's all about getting out there and understanding property development, looking in the right places for the right deals, doing your due diligence, there's a mouthful, giving correct due diligence. And look, there's still deals to be found out there. We got students, searching for sure. And when we're looking for a good project to do, we throw a lot in the rubbish bin. You've got to be prepared to do that and to find the ones that really work. And when they work, well, you jump on them. And there are deals out there. But it's improving. I mean, overseas migration, it went back to zero. And that's always been a big driver of our markets, of our housing market and our capital growth. And so that's on the increase. And looking for future the next couple of years for overseas migration is quite enormous. And the big winners of that are often Sydney and Melbourne, but the other capital cities as well get some get a feed out of that. And so I think it's much better times ahead as things settle down. And nationally we're still suffered a housing shortage. We have since 1944, and with a lot more overseas migration coming in, and they're wealthier people. They're overseas migrants. They'll move into the housing market. They'll move into the rental market, which is really tight, but they'll also buy. And so, I think it's good times ahead, but sensibly, always sensibly.
One of the my past guests is a friend of mine, and I think she might have done the course with you, Dr. Dion Payne. And
Dion, yes, one of my mentoring students from the past.
Yeah. She's great,
Yeah.
and she's doing some really good stuff in the affordable housing space. And I think it's important when you're
Mm.
looking at property development, and you're going to make a lot of money, but it's not just about the money you're making. It's who are you impacting from that development? Are you providing housing to people that really need it, especially with the cost of rent going up everywhere and more homelessness going on at the moment. So there are different things, properties, style of properties that you can develop, whether it is, specialized like NDIS to help, um, you know, disability support, or it can be co-living arrangements. So, multiple,
Yep.
self-contained units within one house. So you're helping the community and keeping the cost of rent down as well. So I think I'd encourage anyone out there to really start, looking and learning more and more about this space if you're interested. And I really wanted to just sort of wrap it up and just mention that to our listeners, we want to offer, a 10% discount on, on your course, or your online course, and you're going to put together a discount code, which is Victor 10, so 10%, Victor 10, when you're basically on the new website. Um, Property. What's your website called again?
Propertymastermind.com.au.
Awesome. Propertymastermind.com.au, and when you select the course, just make sure you put in that discount code. I'll put it into the show notes. And I just wanted to ask one more question about your mentoring, because Hillary, she's comes more from a coaching background and a lot to do with mindset. She's your business partner. Does she help more on the mentoring side?
Yeah, she does. Well, she's my business partner and my life partner, actually, as it turns out. So I scored big tea times there. But yeah, Hillary has a Hillary has a long history in coaching, but also property. She's involved in 3 developments at the moment. She's also done a lot of renos. I think she's done about 23 renovations in a time. So she bought her first property at 18. So she's all into property, but coaching and performance coaching. Mindset coaching as well. She's been doing that for many, many years, and so that's the other component. I'm sure you'd agree that to be successful in any field, it's not just filling your head with knowledge. You have to apply it and reply it rigorously, but also everything else that goes with it. Planning. You have to have a plan. You have to be true to your plan, and you have to be accountable to your plan for that matter. And also, be in the right space headwise. And property development is not just about absorbing all the knowledge of property development, and we realise that, and therefore in our mentoring program, Hillary works with people as well to help them get organised. And everybody's different. Everybody is going at a different pace, and we're all going in the same direction in terms of property development, but not everybody is the same. Just different social situations, financial situations, age, work, everything. And so we sort of customise a program to suit the individual, and Hillary's at the forefront with all of that, and is a very interesting person in terms of supplying that missing ingredient, that 6 inches of real estate between your ears, which is critical to success. Not just the head knowledge of property development. It's a good combo.
No, I think
great results with that.
You guys have figured it out, and it's such an important piece because my last guest, his name is Scott Robinson. He's called the Brain Guy. The episode will air shortly, and he really talks about your beliefs and your mindset, and it's so important because if someone's hasn't been born into wealth and they're seeking financial freedom, they've got some unconscious beliefs and patterns and paradigms that sort of keep them where they're at and keep the ceiling of what they achieve financially at that same level. So they do actually need some help to break through those internal barriers and reprogram themselves for success, reprogram themselves for worthiness, right? Because imagine you had no money your whole life,
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden you find Bob and Hillary's, and they're offering you a pathway to earn millions potentially, and you've come from zero in the minus. It's such a big shock to kind of comprehend and believe that you're worthy of earning that because no one in your family ever has. You've never had that. You've never had any opportunities for that. But you want that, right? Deep down, you want financial freedom. You know that you're capable of doing it, but you want to feel like you believe it and you deserve it. So that's where it's so important to get that mindset right. And I want to acknowledge you for the work that you do, the amount of years you've put into this, the amount of people that you've helped. You and Hillary are doing a great thing, and I'm really glad to have you on the show today and to get to know you more and to be able to offer our listeners that discount, because I think if you're listening and this is something that you deep down believe you're capable of doing, jump on. And if you want to connect to Bob and the team, where else can they find you?
Well, certainly we're on all the platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it, we're there. It is a good place to start at the website. You can have a look at our products, but also, contact us, send us an email, phone. We've got our 1300 number there. We'll have a chat about your aspirations and how we might be able to help with those.
Amazing. I'll probably sign up for that mentoring course in the coming months, I'd say. Awesome. Thanks so much, Bob. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You're welcome. If you enjoyed that, please follow us on our socials. Please tune in to the next episode. See you soon. Everything on this podcast is general in nature and for education purposes only. None of your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs has been taken into consideration. I highly recommend you seek personal, financial, legal, taxation, and credit advice before you take any action on what has been heard on this podcast.